Hello world, it's Austin. Let's talk about being transgender and Christian. If you've been on any kind of social media in the last few days, no doubt you've seen all the hype around Caitlyn Jenner. There's been a lot of positive press, which is awesome. More visibility, very cool, but there's also been some negativity, mostly coming from conservative Christians. Several people have said, for instance, that you don't get to just go around changing your name whenever you feel like it, and some people have even said that they refuse to call Caitlyn by her preferred name and pronouns. My friends Friar Shay and Eliel Cruz have written some great articles on why using people's names is important and why you should use Caitlyn's name, so I'm going to link those down below. Definitely go check them out. They're great articles. So today, the obvious connection is talking about biblical characters who have had their names changed and why those names are important. Let's go through a couple of stories and see what similarities we might recognize between the people in the Bible who experience name changes and trans people who experience name changes. First, there's Abraham and Sarah. Abraham began his life with a different name, Abram. The name Abram means something like noble father, which would seem like kind of a cruel joke considering poor Abraham and his wife didn't have any kids well into their 90s. Genesis 17 tells the story of Abram's new name and God's covenant with Abraham to give him land, blessing, and children. It's here in Genesis 17 verses 4 through 6 that God says, "As for me, this is my covenant with you. You shall be the ancestor of a multitude of nations. No longer shall your name be Abram, but your name shall be Abraham. For I have made you the ancestor of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you, and kings shall come from you. I will establish my covenant between me and you, and your offspring after you, throughout their generations, for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your offspring after you." Later on, Sarah, Abraham's wife, also experiences a name change. Originally, her name was Sarai, which means something like chieftainess or princess. Sarah, her new name, has basically the same meaning, but with that H on the end, you have a more definite article, so it's more like the princess or the ruler. This makes sense as Sarah was the mother for all of the Hebrew nations. Chapter 17, verses 15 and 16 say, God said to Abraham, "As for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and moreover, I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she shall give rise to nations. Kings of people shall come from her." So in this case, God took two people whose birth names were sort of a foreshadowing of what was to come, and God gave them new names that showed who they truly were. Trans folks take or choose names that truly reflect us in the same way. And many trans Christians will actually go through a naming ceremony where we go with our communities and our churches and we say, "This is my new name," and we remember our baptism and we recognize that God knows all of our names, both given and chosen. Let's take a look at one more biblical figure whose name changed. Good old Simon Peter. He was a fisherman before he met Jesus, and his name, Simon, which we read, is an English version of the Hebrew name Shimeon, and Shimeon basically means he who hears, or he who listens. That was a pretty alright name for Peter, although sometimes it seems like he does a lot more talking than listening. But he must have been doing a lot more listening than people thought, because in Matthew chapter 16, when Jesus asked the disciples who they think he is, Simon Peter's the one who gets it right. Matthew 16, verses 15 through 18 go like this. Jesus said to them, "Who do you say that I am?" And Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him and said, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it." Peter is the Greek word for stone or rock. And so Simon was renamed Peter because he was the one who listened and understood. And even though it wasn't his own doing, and even though it was only for a little while, he got it. Jesus didn't change Peter's name to show what Peter was capable of, or what he had done up to that point, or who he was up to that point. Jesus changed Peter's name to show what Peter was capable of with God's help. In the same way, I think a lot of trans people choose names that show where they're going. It shows our potential to become. If God's grace allowed for all the times Peter messed up, and yet Jesus still chose him to be the rock for the church, then I'd say we trans people have a pretty good shot of living into our names too. So go out there and respect people's names and pronouns, and remember that you are loved. We'll see you back here next week, friends. Peace.